work out. There is a way to achieve the product bundling in terms of the defensive play as far as co-location is concerned. Okay. Now coming to the other product lines, now there is a spectrum, and the way I would draw the spectrum, so we talked about the tethering into connection dense locations, right? So let's take a look at networks or managed networks. So the basic product that someone like a Pulsant can offer is a bundled network product, a cross-connect at its most basic level, but it can be a switched or routed product, so very similar to sort of managed Ethernet or even an IP MPLS product, providing capacity into an interconnection dense location, and they can sort of bundle that with their co-location product. So that's in terms of network or managed network services at the most basic level.
And I think they're already doing that.
Sure. Yeah. So if they are, then it's a good defensive play. But it's good to draw the distinction between what is a defensive play versus what will allow them to grow revenues. Right?
Okay.
So the whole area of network services, people will say yes, it's a separate product line and they're growing revenues. But in my mind, that's firmly a defensive play because all it's doing is making the basic co-location product viable.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, moving on, there is a spectrum from a managed service to managed hosting. We'll look at the sequence in a moment, to private cloud and a hybrid cloud offering. Okay. Now, typically, when you talk of managed, actually you should put managed hosting first and then managed service second in terms of the logical sequence. Now, when you talk of managed hosting, basically what a provider will do is offer up servers and switches and so on and so forth, usually on a shared service basis, without an enterprise IT organization having to buy the underlying co-location or indeed the physical hardware. And so typically in terms of managed hosting, what someone would be providing is a number of virtual machines or even servers. At the most basic level, managed hosting is where you take a CapEx model. Let's say a server costs $100,000, and what you're then saying is, well, in terms of the CIO or CTO, well, pay me over a 3-year period, and here is the OPEX equivalent of that, right? Yeah. And it tends to be quite a high margin play for those customers that aren't particularly commercially savvy themselves. Yeah. Managed services are more complex in the sense that you're starting to step into the application layer. And what you're basically saying is, I will actually manage your application stack for you. Forget about what's underneath. Forget about even whether there are virtual machines or whatever underneath. If you've got an SAP or if you've got a Siebel or a Salesforce or whatever, I will manage the life cycle of that application for you. Yeah. In terms of the hosting of it, in terms of ensuring it is performant, that your users have access. And then there are usually end user computing services that are thrown in along with firewalls and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a spectrum from managed hosting to managed services, but there are good value adds for players like Pulsant.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge with something like managed hosting, I mean, this is a challenge with most of these services over time. They get commoditized. And so what you tend to get with a Microsoft Azure or an Amazon Web Services is they start moving up the stack. And what you can get out of an AWS, for example, is very similar to managed hosting in terms of being able to spin up your own virtual infrastructure. And further, you can, using the platform services, let's say at its most esoteric level, you could use something like a Lambda function, which allows you to call up code without ever having to worry about what physical hardware, operating systems, whatever gets spun up underneath, right? So there is a risk of commoditization, but there are, again, a couple of